I'm on vacation, seeking refuge from the relentless stress of my executive job, and I decide to rent a cabin deep in the remote hills, far from civilization. It's my way of recharging my drained batteries, with nothing but the serene wilderness to keep me company. Everything was fine until one ominous day. Mid-morning, I heard an inconspicuous rustling in the distance. Innocuous enough, right? But when it continued, I finally glanced in that direction and saw him, a solitary figure lurking in the woods. My first instinct was to assume he was just another hiker, so I gave a friendly wave. That wave was the start of my descent into an unsettling abyss. He acknowledged me with a wave of his own, nothing unusual there. But then, his behavior took a sinister turn. He didn't retreat into the forest or continue on his way. Instead, he just stood there, staring at me, his gaze unrelenting and prolonged. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as he locked his eyes onto mine. Finally, he disappeared into the trees, leaving me deeply unsettled. I couldn't shake off the feeling of dread that had settled over me, so I retreated into the cabin, locking the door, and tried to lose myself in a book. The rest of the day passed without incident, but as night fell, strange noises emanated from the driveway. My heart raced as I ventured outside with a flashlight, scanning the darkness for any sign of the man. I saw movement among the bushes and my apprehension intensified. I hurried back inside, locked the door, and sought solace in a drink or two, or maybe more. The alcohol dulled my nerves, and in my inebriated stupor, I stumbled into my room, collapsing onto my bed. But the real horror awaited me in the morning. As the hangover clawed its way into my skull, I stumbled into the living room, only to be greeted by two chilling sights. First, the front door, which I distinctly remembered locking, was now unlocked. And second, a note hung ominously on the door, a stark message etched onto it: "You might want to keep a light on. You walked right by me for your piss break." I didn't need another sign. I fled the cabin that very day, my heart pounding with terror. The remote hills I once sought refuge in had transformed into a nightmare, and I vowed never to return to that desolate, haunting place. When I inherited my aunt's remote cabin in the woods, I was intrigued but never truly thought much about it. The memories of our family visits were fading, and I had grown up, far removed from the place. But everything changed when I turned 25 and heard of her passing. At the will reading, I learned that the cabin was now mine, and curiosity began to gnaw at me. What had become of it since I was a child? The problem was, work kept me busy, and I couldn't take time off right away. It wasn't until 6 months later that I embarked on a journey to unveil the secrets of that secluded retreat. The drive through the dense forest was eerily reminiscent of my childhood trips. The towering trees and winding dirt road seemed frozen in time, untouched by the years that had passed. As I approached the cabin, excitement mixed with a sense of foreboding, and my heart raced. But then, as I turned into the familiar driveway, something sent a shiver down my spine. Someone was sitting on the porch swing. Panic threatened to grip me as I hesitated, my hands tightening on the steering wheel. The figure on the porch didn't seem to notice my arrival, so I decided to pull over and recheck the address on the paperwork. My trembling hands clutched the documents, verifying that this was indeed my cabin. The unease settled in, and I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was wrong. Yet, a misguided sense of curiosity compelled me to investigate further. Perhaps this stranger had a connection to my aunt. I mustered the courage to turn around and head back to the cabin. However, as I drew closer, my heart pounded louder. Fear crept in, and my resolve began to waver. The man on the porch was still there, unmoving, his presence unsettling. I couldn't bring myself to turn into the driveway. Instead, I continued past the cabin and drove back to town, my mind racing with dread. At the police station, I recounted the bizarre encounter, feeling like a coward for my actions. The officers agreed to check out the cabin while I waited at a local cafe. Hours passed, each minute feeling like an eternity. Finally, a police officer entered the cafe, holding a folder with a chilling photo inside. He showed it to me, asking if it was the man I had seen on the porch. It was him, without a doubt. The officer explained that when they arrived at the cabin, the man had fled inside, resisting arrest until they managed to handcuff him. His shocking revelation sent shivers down my spine. The man was wanted in California for murdering his girlfriend, and he had been hiding out in that very cabin for months, thinking it was abandoned. As I reflected on my decision to not confront the stranger, I realized it had been a life-saving choice. Who knows what might have transpired had I gone up to the cabin? The man's conviction for murder confirmed that my gut feeling had been right all along. I may have been a nervous wreck, but I had unwittingly avoided a potentially deadly encounter in the dark heart of the woods. The story I'm about to tell you might make your skin crawl. I was always a skeptic, never one to buy into the whole supernatural nonsense. My belief in ghosts and all that spooky stuff vanished as I grew older. I thought it was all just tales to scare little kids. But what happened that summer in that remote cabin? Well, that shook my disbelief to the core. It was my second year of college, and my buddy Jack and I decided to rent a cabin in the woods. We'd gone to different colleges, but we made it a tradition to reunite during the summer. The first year was a blast, we went on a road trip. However, the second summer, I was drained from finals and needed a break. Jack suggested we rent a cabin out in the woods for some relaxation and local fishing. We arrived at the cabin sight unseen, but neither of us was disappointed. The place was stunning, and the first day and night were idyllic. But then came the second morning. I stumbled into the kitchen, hungry and grumpy, ready to dig into a stack of microwave sandwiches I'd bought for breakfast. That's when I noticed something was off. Someone had opened the box and taken one of my sandwiches. No big deal, I thought. Jack was my best friend, and I didn't mind sharing. But when I asked him about it, he swore he hadn't touched a sandwich. I figured he was pulling my leg, but the strange occurrences escalated. The next day, another sandwich disappeared. I was convinced Jack was pranking me, but he maintained his innocence. Then came the night that turned my skepticism into sheer terror. I awoke to the sound of Jack shuffling around in the living room. It was bizarre because Jack was known for sleeping like a rock. I called out, asking if everything was okay, but there was no response. I waited, anxiety gnawing at my gut, but still, nothing. Jack had never been one to ignore a call for help. The next day, my sandwich count was down by one again, and Jack insisted he hadn't been up in the middle of the night. I began suspecting him, thinking he was playing tricks on me. But then, things took an eerie turn. That night, I was jolted awake by a creaking noise. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at my slightly open bedroom door. Something was there, partly visible, and then it slammed the door shut. I leaped out of bed, adrenaline surging through me, and dashed into the living room, expecting to catch Jack in the act. But the living room was empty. I searched the cabin, my fear growing with every step. All the windows and doors were locked tight, there was no way anyone could have entered. I had no choice but to return to my room, though sleep was impossible. In the morning, I confronted Jack, and he insisted he hadn't moved during the night. He wasn't playing a prank or spying on me, and I believed him. That's when he floated the idea that the cabin might be haunted. I laughed it off, dismissing the idea, but as night fell, my skepticism began to wane. I couldn't shake the fear that gripped me, preventing sleep. After an hour of tossing and turning, I decided to grab a late-night snack. Maybe it would calm my nerves. Sleepily, I made my way to my bedroom and opened the door. Then, I saw it, something moving across the room. It froze when I opened the door, then vanished with a loud slam. I fumbled for the light switch, and that's when I noticed something I'd missed before, a cellar door in the living room. Fear washed over me as I connected the dots. I raced back to the living room, shoved the couch over the cellar door, and then rushed to wake up Jack. He was a burly guy, and he guarded the door while I called the police. It took them only half an hour to arrive. They brought out a frail, sickly-looking woman from the cellar. She'd been living there, surviving on stolen food. She turned out to be a schizophrenic, someone who had spent time in psychiatric wards. She posed no real threat to us, but the realization that, while we slept, she'd been wandering the cabin, eating our food, sent shivers down my spine. This was a nightmare that even my skeptic's mind couldn't have conjured. Deep in the heart of a dense, dark forest, a lone hiker ventured toward their isolated cabin, seeking a peaceful retreat from the chaos of everyday life. The path they tread was narrow, hemmed in by towering, ancient trees that whispered secrets with their rustling leaves. There were no other cabins nearby, promising the solitude they craved. As they continued their trek, the symphony of nature's sounds surrounded them, the rustling of leaves, the melodious chirping of birds, and the gentle rustle of creatures hidden in the underbrush. But then, without warning, the woods fell eerily silent. In the world of nature, silence was a harbinger of doom. The hiker froze, every nerve tingling with trepidation. They strained their ears to catch any faint signs of danger. And then, like a sinister overture, the sound of approaching footsteps emerged. They were muffled yet steady, and they seemed to be creeping closer from the right side of the woods. A chill ran down their spine, and their heart raced as adrenaline surged through their veins. Panic threatened to overwhelm them, but they fought to remain calm. The footsteps drew nearer, growing louder with each passing second. Suddenly, emerging from the shadows, a man appeared. His disheveled appearance belied his age, somewhere in his 40s perhaps. But it was his sinister grin, the glint of madness in his wild eyes that sent shivers down the hiker's spine. It was a gaze that seemed to penetrate their very soul, rendering them immobile. Frozen in place, they couldn't tear their gaze away from his menacing stare. The man, however, made no move toward them. Instead, he seemed to be crossing from one side of the woods to the other, cutting an eerie path directly in front of the petrified hiker. But what chilled them to the core was that, even as he traversed the forest, he never once broke eye contact. The unnerving intensity of his gaze held them captive. Then, as abruptly as he had appeared, he vanished into the trees on the other side. His stare released its grip, and the hiker could finally breathe. For a while, the forest remained hushed, as though in mourning for the darkness that had passed through. The birds ceased their chirping, and the leaves no longer rustled. It was as if the very heart of the woods had held its breath during his malevolent passage. Torn between fear and determination, the hiker eventually decided to continue their journey. They couldn't let this unsettling encounter deter them from reaching the safety of their cabin. With each step, they forced themselves to move forward, deeper into the ominous woods. After an hour of nerve-wracking hiking, they finally reached their destination, their private cabin. The relief they felt upon seeing it was overwhelming, and they wasted no time locking themselves inside. Every creak of the forest outside sent shivers down their spine as they peered through windows, scanning for any sign of the sinister man. Thankfully, the night passed without further incident. The hours were spent in a tense silence, with the hikers seeking solace in the shelter of their cabin. They couldn't shake the unsettling encounter, wondering who that man was and what sinister intentions he might have harbored. But one thing was certain: during their stay in the woods, they never saw him again. Sometimes, they would ponder whether he was simply lost or tormented by his own demons. Yet, the memory of that eerie, haunting encounter would forever linger in the shadows of their mind. I couldn't contain my excitement as my friends and I embarked on a weekend adventure to a quaint cabin nestled deep within the heart of an isolated forest. Our plans were simple: one night of escape from the hustle and bustle of the city, a chance to bask in the tranquil embrace of Mother Nature herself. The moment we arrived at the cabin, its old-fashioned charm gripped us. Surrounded by towering trees, it exuded an eerie calmness that immediately sent shivers down our spines. The setting sun painted everything with a sinister, golden hue, foreshadowing the horrors that would soon unfold. After settling in, we decided to explore the nearby woods. The dense, green canopy of trees beckoned to us, its whispering leaves promising secrets hidden within. Eagerly, we ventured into the abyss, gulping in the crisp, ominous air. As daylight waned, the woods took on an altogether different character. Shadows crept ominously between the trees, and the once inviting path became a sinister labyrinth. But we pushed on, oblivious to the gathering darkness. Then, it began. Footsteps. Faint at first, like the softest of whispers, but gradually growing louder and more distinct. Panic spread through our group like wildfire. We exchanged fearful glances, our hearts pounding in unison, a chilling crescendo that echoed our dread. We tried to convince ourselves that it was just a harmless forest critter, but deep down, we knew better. Something was out there, something that didn't belong. As the footsteps drew closer, we retreated to the cabin. A sense of foreboding hung in the air as we locked ourselves inside, each creak of the floorboards outside sending jolts of terror down our spines. The minutes dragged on like hours until, finally, the footsteps receded, retreating into the heart of the sinister woods. Relief washed over us, but it was short-lived. The night held even more sinister surprises. Morning brought a haunting revelation. We dared to venture outside, praying for a rational explanation. What we found chilled us to the bone. Human footprints stained the earth near our front door, proof that we were not alone in this remote wilderness. Then, the horror deepened. A twisted, lifeless dog lay just outside the cabin's threshold, its mangled body a grotesque testament to the malevolence that lurked in the night. One of my friends couldn't bear the sight and retched in disgust and fear. Terrified and trembling, we hastily gathered our belongings and fled the cabin, leaving behind a nightmare that defied explanation. As we escaped into the daylight, we knew we had to report this ordeal. Airbnb had to be informed of the terrors that lurked in their seemingly idyllic rental, and the authorities had to investigate the sinister secrets that the wilderness had concealed. The echoes of that night's horrors continue to haunt my dreams, a chilling reminder that even in the most serene corners of the world, malevolent forces can stir, lurking just beyond the shadows, waiting to shatter the illusion of peace and tranquility.